Hello there everyone, and welcome to the first episode of a new series called Plum's Peculiars, in which we investigate oddities of the Great British Isles, a little off the beaten track or a little under the radar. I'm going local, exploring social history through a sense of place and also the humans that lived there. And this includes their settlements, behaviours, customs, belongings, curiosities, and sometimes a bit of that old way wisdom, a little spot of folklore. In this episode, we'll be looking at a place that's been close to my heart since childhood, Stewartby Brickworks, and specifically the giant brickworks chimneys. Stewartby is on the outskirts of Bedford, a town I grew up in and around and will always have a great affection for. On a recent trip back home last month, by sheer coincidence, I discovered, literally the night before, that the 4 remaining Stewartby chimneys, which puffed out hard for the London Brick Company, were due to be demolished. I got myself over to the site quick sharp to take some final footage and photos of the impressive structures in their last standing minutes. The kilns and chimneys, of which there was once 167, were the beating heart of Stewartby for over 100 years. It was home to the London Brick Company and all those who worked there. Stewartby, designed as a model village to house workers of the London Brick Company, was built on lands once inhabited by farming settlements. Areas previously known as Wootton Broadmead and Wootton Pillage before becoming the parish of Stewartby. Let's backtrack a little. This area was already home to brickyards and chimneys, since 1898 in fact. So why was this? Well, the land had rich pickings, sitting within a large belt of Oxford clay, which extends from Dorset to Yorkshire. The unique properties of this clay were perfect for producing Fletton bricks, so called because of their inception in Oxford clay-rich Fletton near Peterborough. They're also known as common bricks. What made the clay so perfect for these bricks was its carbonaceous content, meaning that fuel cost was low. Each unfired brick contained 5% lignite to supply 75% of the energy needed to fire the brick. And the character of the clay also meant that the fabric could be forced into brick moulds straight from the pit, no messing around. It was perfect. So we have all these small to medium-sized brick companies producing great bricks from the Oxford clay around this area. Well, what next? London Brick. They capitalised on this and snapped up the Wootton Broadmead Company of James Randall in 1900, and in 1905 followed that up by acquiring a further 450 acres of land at Wootton Pillage. The growth had begun. After the First World War, the various brickmakers within the Oxford clay belt were reduced to 4 main groups. Many of the smaller brick companies lost out to competition. London Brick Company once again saw an opportunity. More land acquisitions, mergers and buyouts followed, and LBC continued to expand. It was actually during this period that the last surviving Hoffman kilns and chimneys we're looking at today were built. By 1926, the works on Stewartby Model Village began. At that point, it was still under the Wootton Pillage hamlet name, but changes were taking shape. By 1929, many houses and the first square was completed, as well as, standing at the centre of the village, the Memorial Hall in memory of villagers who lost their lives in World War I. A further 3 squares, a social club, general store and a school had popped up by 1934, and despite having been turned down for its own parish status in 1931, Stewartby, still called the Wootton name, was on its way to becoming its own civil parish. This community, effectively the creation of the London Brick Company, was almost exclusively made up of inhabitants working at the brickworks. In 1936, Stewartby was recognised as the largest brickworks in the world, employing 2,000 people, producing 500 million bricks a year. The name change came in 1936. Both the company name, which had been lengthened and shortened over years of mergers, well, that was changed back again to London Brick Company. And also we now see the village name changing. It was at this point changed to Stuartby, honouring the family name of the London Brick Company directors since 1900, the Stuart family. At the height of the industry's production, there were 167 brick chimneys in the Marston Vale. The kilns are known as Hoffmann kilns. They were patented for brickmaking by the German Friedrich Hoffmann in 1858. They are the most commonly used kiln in brickmaking and, later, in lime burning. They were then known as the Hoffmann Continuous Kiln. At the height of World War II, fears that the brickworks would make an excellent target for Jerry seemed all too real. They needn't have worried. It was actually London Brick Company's main competitor, the Marston Vale Brick Company, who suffered a direct hit on the 24th of September 1940 by a high explosive bomb. LBC's engineering works assisted in the war effort by manufacturing machine gun parts, and the clay pits were used to test American import tanks. What a great use of the pits! It's the post-war years that I'm most interested in. The foreign labour boom that saw Bedford becoming the culturally diverse place I recognised as a child. Indeed, members of my own Italian immigrant family worked at London Brick. The company name was something I'd heard from my high chair to high school. It was always connected to someone we knew. In fact, I don't think I could find a single old Bedfordian, especially one with Italian heritage, who wasn't familiar with Stuartby and the London Brick Company, and this is why. Following the Second World War, the governments of England and Italy entered into an agreement which saw tens of thousands of Italians migrate to England to work in, amongst others, the coal, textile and rubber industries. The vast majority of workers were assigned to brickworks across the country to help produce the bricks needed to rebuild cities devastated by World War II bombings. Now, I often wondered how that went down with the local population, especially in the village I grew up in. However, my grandmother's family, themselves Italian, told no tales of discontent. But it was ironic, though, that same village had its own World War II prisoner of war camp, and that also housed many Italians. So there was this real strange juxtaposition going on. And these same people also went on to work at the brickworks if they remained in England. So to get the bigger picture and be more accurate statistically, I'm quoting here from the Bedfordshire Borough Archives. The demand for labour in the brickyards following the war was a factor that was to have great effect on the population of the surrounding towns and villages. Male Bedfordians had no wish to return to the filth of the brick kilns, to the long, unsociable hours, to strenuous shift work with little mechanisation to alleviate the laborious toil involved in production. The wages were no longer considered high. A small number of prisoners of war who had been working on farms remained or returned to Bedfordshire to work at the brick pits. The brick companies built hostels for them, and the other European volunteer workers who came from displaced persons camps through Europe, principally Poland and the Ukraine. There was mass migration from the south of Italy to Bedford. The brick companies were so desperate for labour that they set up recruitment offices in Naples. By 1955, 92% of male Italian migrants arrived on brickwork contracts, and of the 783 who arrived that year, 468, that's 60%, stayed. Now, I just, getting my head around that we were so desperate for labour that we were setting up offices, recruitment offices in Naples. I mean, all of this is ringing such a bell with our 2021 present situation. It is just so fascinating. Now, it's recorded that 7,500 Italians settled in Bedford in the 1950s and 60s, many working at the brickworks, which created something of a little Italy in Bedford and surrounding villages. and Bedford is now home to 14,000 descendants of these workers. Statistically, around 1 in 5 Bedfordians is of Italian descent, so if any of you are listening, you know who you are. At its peak, London Brick Company had its own ambulance, fire crews, a horticultural department, a photographic department, as well as its own leisure pastimes. It had its own swimming pool inside the factory and ran a number of sports clubs. Now, here comes the inevitable. By the late 1960s, the building industry was in recession. There was a need to diversify, and Sir Ronald Stewart was canny in his actions. In September 1970, London Brick Landfill Limited started on their new contract: the controlled tipping of household and industrial waste into the excavated clay pits. It was a winning idea and boomed well into the 80s. However, the roller coaster of changing times had kicked in, impossible to stop. There were ups and downs, a boom in the 1980s, a slump in the 1990s, staff layoffs, cutbacks, and closures of nearby LBC departments were announced. But the brickworks hung in there, alongside other LBC endeavours. But let's fast forward to 2008 and we see the final nail in the brickworks coffin. Despite spending more than £1 million from 2005 to 7 in an attempt to reduce sulphur dioxide emissions, Stewart B Brickworks, by this time owned by Hanson's UK, was unable to meet acceptable emissions levels and was closed. Brickworks at Stewart B had ceased production. At this point, Historic England awarded 2 of the kilns and 4 chimneys Grade 2 listed status, and they said the following: the Hoffman kilns are impressive structures, a type specifically designed for their industry. Stewart B is the last remaining of the Bedfordshire brickworks, and it has international significance, having been for a time the largest brickworks in the world, and the importance of these works in the history of England and their iconic status in the landscape should be recognised. They also acknowledged that designation of listed building status recognises the lasting impact the brickmaking industry has had in forging the character of local communities due to the high number of workers who were encouraged to come from abroad specifically to work in the industry. Now that really is something, isn't it? So what happened? Well, it's the same old story. Despite Historic England stating that the chimneys were perfectly safe and, I quote, there was no reason why they should be demolished, Hanson's stated that the chimneys were, and again I quote, a risk to public safety. Plans to the site are afoot. Hanson UK plan to develop the land, of course. They say they will be constructing more than 1,000 houses and a business park. So, I mean, really, why didn't they keep these chimneys a feature? But there we have it. What's done is done. But there's one final part that I find utterly nonsensical. Hansons say they will build, get this, a new replica chimney in memory of the old ones. Okay. Well, if you were expecting to see the chimneys coming down on this video, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you. I didn't stick around for that. It was just too much to see in person. I have since watched it online, kind of accidentally, but never mind. It's a really terrible shame that the chimneys were destroyed. Anyway, I hope you were inspired to have a little look online for the chimneys and the clay pits surrounding the brickworks. There is some happier news actually. If you wanted to go and visit this area of Marston Vale, the clay pits have been turned into some wonderful nature reserves, rich in animals, birds and all sorts of loveliness. So go and check that out. I hope you enjoyed the first programme in this new series. I've got lots more coming up, as well as the second part of my Suffolk adventure, and also I've got lots more mudlarking with old Father Thames on the way. Alright folks, well, until the next time, keep merry and be well. Bye for now.